Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, my name is Micah and this channel is dedicated to learning, teaching, and discussing everything about cybersecurity. So today we'll be working on the Cloud Resume Challenge and we'll be updating our front end with some JavaScript. The JavaScript will send an HTTP request to an API gateway, which will in turn trigger a Lambda function that will update a DynamoDB table containing our visitor count. We'll update the visitor count and then return the visitor count to our website. So without further ado, let's get started. All right, so the first thing that we want to do is create our DynamoDB table, our partition key, and then an attribute to store our visitor count. So let's go to DynamoDB and we're going to create a table. Let's name the table, named it mine visitor count table, and then the visitor count ID set as a number, create table. And we're going to wait for this to finish creating. Perfect. So now let's create an attribute to store our visitor count. So let's hit explore table items, create item, add new attribute as a number. I'm going to call this visitor count. I'm going to set this to 0 as well and hit create item. All right, so the next thing is creating our Lambda function that will update this visitor count whenever we get traffic to our website. So let's go to Lambda, hit create function. I'm going to name mine visitor counter. The runtime is Python, and I'm using 3.12. Hit create function. And we'll wait for that to load. All right, so that is successfully created. And one thing to note is this Lambda handler, and we'll talk about what that does here in a second. So let's jump into our actual code. And all right, let's talk about what we've done here. So we have a .env file over here, and it contains these environment variables. So I have my AWS access key, secret access key, and the table name within this .env file. And we're going to use that to authenticate our DynamoDB client to AWS. And we're using Boto 3, which is a Python package which allows you to interact with AWS services. So here's the Lambda handler that I was referencing earlier. So this is a method in your Python code that will process the events. And when your function is invoked, Lambda runs the handler method. So this is required for Lambda function functionality, basically. So we have a function here called getVisitorCount. We pass in a table name and it scans the table, retrieves the response. So if the key that we're looking for, which is visitor count, is present, it will increment the count. Then once we get that attribute, we will update it here with the new count. And then we will we'll update item updates an existing items attribute. So we get the count and then we increment it and then we update it. And then we'll return our count, our new updated count as JSON for our JavaScript to retrieve. So let's go ahead and run this and see exactly if it's working or not. And I commented pretty much everything that's important within this code for learning purposes. So go ahead and feel free to pause the video, see what everything does, and yeah, hopefully that will help somebody out. All right, perfect. So we got our JSON response, and you see the visitor count is updated. We started out with 0. I think I ran it before just a second ago just to make sure. Then I ran it again one more time, so we're at 2. We can run it again just to make sure that it's incrementing correctly. Perfect. All right, so let's hop back into the AWS console and we will update our Lambda functions permissions to make sure that we can access DynamoDB correctly. All right, so back in the web console, we're going to navigate to configuration, then down to permissions. And we see we have a role attached to our Lambda function. We're going to click on the role. then click on the policy attached to the role. And we're going to update this policy document with the correct permissions to our DynamoDB table. So I have that here, copied in another window. I'm going to paste, remove the SID. So basically, we're allowing the action of DynamoDB update item and scan for this resource. And this is the wrong resource. Perfect. Let's hit next. Set this new version as default. Yup. Wait. Yeah, it's fine. All right, perfect. So now our Lambda function has the permissions required to update and scan our DynamoDB table. And let's go ahead and update our Lambda function code here. So we already talked about the local code to execute the Python. We're going to convert it to something that the Lambda function can actually use. And so all we did was remove the environment variables and then add a variable for the DynamoDB table here. So we're going to copy paste. Really don't need print, but I guess it will help to see exactly what's being returned. And let's hit deploy.
Bruh.
All right, so let's go ahead and test our Lambda function. So we're going to create a new test event, call it VC visitor counter test. Make it private, hit save. And we should be able to run the test, and we can see that the response is coming back successfully. And we can actually check our DynamoDB table to make sure that the count is there as well. So, yep, count is 5. So one thing that I noticed that I meant to do correctly, but I didn't do, is I set the visitor counter ID, the primary key, to 0, where the code actually is referencing visitor count ID of 1. So it went ahead and created a new key or new attribute with a visitor count ID of 1. So just something to note. All right, so next we're going to be creating an API gateway for our Lambda function, and it will trigger the Lambda function to execute whenever an HTTP request is sent to our gateway. So let's go here, then add trigger, select the source, API gateway, create a new API, open, and then let's go to our API gateway. We're going to enable cores. So now let's allow access to originating from anywhere to hit our API gateway. And I guess we could lock it down to the S3 bucket, maybe, potentially. Not sure exactly, but for ease of use, we're just going to use a wildcard and allowing every request to our API gateway. So save. Routes. So we're going to configure this or edit this. We're going to use the HTTP method of get to our visitor counter and then hit save. And I'll link my blog post, which contains all the documentation that I read in order to get all of this stuff running. So don't worry about that. All right, so last step is modifying our front end. So let's go ahead and navigate to the S3 bucket. And I've already updated HTML and the CSS, but here I'll show you exactly what I did. So I added a bit of styling for the visitor count to display it correctly. And then I embedded the JavaScript within the HTML to retrieve the count. and then our JavaScript here will we'll basically send an HTTP GET to this our API gateway endpoint, and then it will retrieve the visitor count. So let's go ahead and update this URL with our new and improved endpoint. So let's go to Lambda. Here's the endpoint. And let's update this first line here. And again, all of this code will be linked down below in the description. So I'm going to go ahead and save that. And then I'm going to upload this to my S3 bucket. Like I said, the index.html already has the embedded JavaScript placement, and then the CSS has the updated styling to display the count. So I just needed to delete this. And I'm going to upload. I'm going to drag and drop this from my PC and hit upload. And I'm not sure exactly how long it takes for the changes to be made, but let's go to our website and see if we can retrieve the count. So yeah, that took a while, but I realized it has something to do with DNS maybe, or something's cached, but I'm accessing the URL, the static URL directly from the S3 bucket, and we see that when we go to update our count, it's working properly. So that's working as intended. So the next video will be covering writing Python tests. We'll be mocking some AWS services, and it should be a good time. So if you like the video, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe. We would definitely appreciate it. See you next time.